Comedian Origins. Most hated and vile character in Watchmen universe. The Comedian, also known as Edward Morgan Eddie Blake, is one of the most sinister characters to be called a hero. Even though he is a vigilante, closely associated with superheroes and the government, his actions speak otherwise. He first debuted in the first issue of Watchmen, a limited series graphic novel published in September 1986. The irony in the name of the Comedian is surprising to say the least, considering he isn't funny at all, but rather blunt and brutal like a brawler. Writer Alan Moore collaborated with illustrator Dave Gibbons to create the Comedian. At times, the Comedian exhibits profound meditation on his own brutish character, as well as real grief over humanity's predicament. The Comedian has the longest crime-fighting career of all of the world's costumed vigilantes. Before we go into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us, it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin. Comedian Origins. Once you figure out what a joke everything is, being a comedian is the only thing that makes sense. Eddie Blake's early life is largely unknown. Eddie was born in 1924, and it was rumored that his parents were abusive. He donned a yellow and purple costume and began viciously assaulting criminals, and occasionally their victims under the Comedian title right from the age of 16. He's one of the only characters in Watchmen who operated in both costumed vigilante groups, the Minutemen in the 1940s and the Crimebusters in the 1960s and 1970s. In the Comedian issue number 1, before Watchmen prequel, we came across Comedian when he was offering his services to the government of the United States of America. In the first chapter, we come across the Comedian having a word with the First Lady a few days before the assassination of President Kennedy, where he was pursuing Moloch during the time of the assassination. Unlike the original Watchmen comics, where Ozymandias mentions that the Comedian was in Dallas at the time of the assassination, implying that he was either the assassin or had prior knowledge of the plot. In the second chapter, we come across Eddie Blake having a conversation with Bobby, the brother of the deceased president, during a boxing match. Eddie tells Bobby about how much he respected Jack, and Bobby mentions his political career plans. After that, he goes on to join the military, and we come across the sheer brutality that is expected from the Comedian during his early escapades in Vietnam. In the third chapter, we come across the time when the Comedian, alongside the other Watchmen, was summoned to stop the riots which were in protest of the war in Vietnam. Despite having strict orders not to shoot, the Comedian sought to stop the riot as quickly as he could, resorting to using his guns on any protester he came across. Bobby raised his concern at the actions of the Comedian and asked if the superheroes actually believe in the law. The Comedian argued that his hostility was the only reason the riot stopped. In the following 2 chapters, we again come across the Comedian in Vietnam, killing people in a brutal fashion. Still, we also see the positive side of his character, where he shows his sense of brotherhood and camaraderie by helping wounded soldiers. In the last chapter, we come across the time Eddie received information about the assassination of Senator Kennedy. Senator Kennedy, meanwhile, informs Eddie that he would tell the people about the massacre Eddie made. The Comedian, issue number 1, in Before Watchmen, continues to recreate the character's backstory. This is in contrast to the main Watchmen series, in which Edward Blake is portrayed as a close buddy of Richard Nixon, the one for whom he used to work as an assassin. Blake was close friends with Robert F. Kennedy, John F. Kennedy, and Jackie Kennedy, according to the book. Comedian's time in the Minutemen. In the 1940s, he was a member of the Minutemen, an 8-man disguised crime-fighting vigilante squad. He instigated a brawl against Hooded Justice, who then proceeded to thrash Blake in a fit of anger. Blake kept Hooded Justice at gunpoint and threatened to shoot him and everyone else if they ever harmed him again. So the Minutemen expelled him from the organization. He altered his green and purple clothing to durable leather armor after being wounded in the breast in 1941. Blake was invited to testify for the disappearance and murder of Hooded Justice shortly after the Minutemen dissolved in the 1950s, but he declined. There was never any evidence against him. His escapades with the Crimebusters. Blake became a member of the Crimebusters, commanded by Captain Metropolis in the late 1960s. However, their first meeting did not last long, as the comedian lit fire to one of Metropolis's displays and declared the club to be a farce. Following the Keene Act in the 1970s, the comedian enlisted in the Vietnam War with Dr. Manhattan and was left with a painful and debilitating scar on the left side of his face by an infuriated Vietnamese lady who he had impregnated at the war's end. In vengeance, he shot her, informing Dr. Manhattan, who had been watching the whole affair, that he did nothing despite multiple opportunities to avoid the terrible infraction. After returning home, he aided Night Owl in putting down a riot, only to grow outraged when a piece of rubble struck him in the head, prompting him to open fire on a group with rubber bullets. Night Owl questioned Blake's ruthless choice of action after the mob dispersed, which Blake rejected, claiming that they were saving the masses from themselves. Blake's answer to Night Owl's question about why they had grown so aggressive and what had become of the American dream was, "It became a reality. It's right in front of you." The death and funeral of the comedian. Eddie somehow found out about Ozymandias' secretive plan to invade New York City and was terrified by the plot, but he kept quiet about it. He had paid a drunken visit to Edgar Jacobi, his erstwhile arch-enemy Moloch, in October 1985. Before leaving in a drunken haze, he sobbed and told him that everything was a joke in his life, but he couldn't grasp the one he witnessed on the island. Veidt kicked through Blake's flat door, beat him unconscious, and tossed him out of the window to his death a few days later. Blake's funeral was held in the rain at a cemetery located in New York City. Protesters chanted at the cemetery gates in protest of Blake's horrific crimes as a military operative. Adrian Veidt, John Osterman, and Dan Dryberg were in attendance, as was Walter Kovacs, who remained outside the cemetery gates to conceal his identity from the rest of them. The American flag was draped over his casket. The investigation conducted by Rorschach. Following Blake's death, a lone vigilante known as Rorschach launched his own investigation into the crime. While examining Blake's apartment, Rorschach discovers a hidden closet with a costume and other materials that prove the slain man was the comedian, a former head of both the Minutemen and the Watchmen. Rorschach suspects a scheme to assassinate costumed heroes, masks, as a result of this finding. And his inquiry into Blake's murder led to a far more comprehensive, more terrifying mystery. Zack Snyder's movie adaptation. In the movie Watchmen, released in 2009, Jeffrey Dean Morgan plays the role of the comedian. The events play out a little differently in the film, where it starts with the death of the comedian as he is thrown out of his apartment window by Ozymandias. Rorschach begins the investigation of the comedian's death and seeks help from the members of the erstwhile Watchmen. The movie reveals that the comedian was ousted from the Minutemen for sexually assaulting Silk Spectre. The instance where he shoots the pregnant lady in Vietnam bearing his baby is also depicted as Rorschach approaches Dr. Manhattan for the investigation. He recalls the incident after Rorschach leaves. We also come across the incident when the comedian brutally suppresses the riot when the Night Owl recognizes the situation after Rorschach's visit.
God damn, I love working on American soil, Dan.
Origin of name and character inspiration. According to Alan Moore, the comedian was inspired by G. Gordon Liddy, a former FBI agent who played a key role in the Watergate investigation as the top operator in the White House plumber squad during the Nixon administration. Liddy was found guilty of burglary, conspiracy, and unlawful wiretapping for his part in the affair. Moore pictured Liddy with comic book muscles as the comedian. Rorschach says in the comic that Blake's title, The Comedian, comes from his cynical and possibly selfish worldview that, in a mad world, one can only laugh as if everything is a joke. Moore was inspired by Graham Greene's work, The Comedians, for the name. Powers and abilities possessed by the comedian. The comedian had various powers and abilities, and extreme human condition was one of them. where even at his elderly age, the comedian stood 6 feet 2 inches tall and weighed 225 pounds, prompting police officers to comment that he was sculpted like a linebacker and in excellent form. He could smash through the walls of his flat and even trade blows with Ozymandias. The comedian was killed in advanced hand-to-hand combat and continued to be so even when he died at the age of 61, still having preserved his outstanding physique. He was also an expert knife thrower and wielder. He is among the few people who have defeated Ozymandias in combat, but his abilities deteriorated as he grew older, leading to his loss and death. The comedian was an expert with firearms and weapons, especially pistols, shotguns, and rifles. Blake was adept with a .45 caliber pistol, M1911, pump-action shotgun, tear gas grenades, M16 rifles, Smith & Wesson 586, Uzi, leather body armor, and MAC-10 submachine gun. He used a lot of conventional weaponry in most of his adventures, like grenade launchers and flamethrowers. His government-approved actions show he acquired unconventional warfare and covert operations training. He was also skilled in other aspects of war, like demolitions, military protocol, investigation, and leadership. Blake was a government-sanctioned assassin from 1942 until his death, and he got specialized training in special operations, urban and guerrilla warfare, espionage, intelligence collection, and military tactics throughout his time as a government-sanctioned operative. He was so competent and effective in these covert disciplines that he worked for the U.S. government as a black ops-type operative in the 1960s and 1970s. Potentially as a member of the CIA's Secret Special Activities Division. He served in multiple conflicts as an active warrior and government liaison, most prominently in World War II and the Vietnam War, where he killed several enemy fighters without any compassion whatsoever. Blake was a brilliant investigator with exceptional deduction and analysis abilities, despite his lack of formal schooling. He was the first figure to completely understand and realize Dr. Manhattan's developing separation and isolation from humanity, as well as the first disguised adventurer to learn about Ozymandias' scheme. He also accurately predicted Hooded Justice's sexual orientation, albeit he wasn't the only one who had this suspicion. Blake was a superb marksman and was skilled with practically every military and non-military grade firearm. The costume was the original flamboyant outfit of the comedian, which consisted of a purple and a bright yellow boiler suit. To conceal his identity, he wore purple gloves and boots, as well as a domino mask of the same color. He also had a vibrant red belt buckle with a laughing face on it. The various other equipment used by the comedian included the 2 costumes and a smiley face badge. After being stabbed in 1941, he decided to change his clothing into something much more protective, and that is when Costume 2 happened. He subsequently created the armor that he would wear for the rest of his career, which was composed of solid leather with patriotic shoulder padding. Albeit, he maintained the same mask. He donned a black leather mask to cover his scar after his former mistress sliced his face at the end of the Vietnam War. The comedian is frequently shown wearing or near the smiley face button, which is strongly linked with him and has become an iconic emblem of the Watchmen saga as a whole. Throughout the book, the button is covered with a single drop of blood at the start of the series, which is at the level of the minute hand of the doomsday clock at the beginning of the series, 5 minutes to midnight if the button is considered a clock face. What makes the comedian the most hated and vile character of the Watchmen? Blake is a cigar-smoking, gun-wielding vigilante who has transitioned into a paramilitary agent. He has been described as deliberately amoral and having practiced cynicism, implying that he has no respect for societal norms or human life. He characterizes the world as a cruel joke that only he gets. Still, his studied cynicism is broken when the comedian finds a scheme that he considers a practical joke that even he can't fathom anybody would pull. Edward Blake may have been on the side of the heroes, but he was a sadistic, violent, and vicious psychopath who used heroism as a pretext to harm criminals. Later, as a veteran of the Vietnam War, the comedian served for a corrupt government and committed even more heinous acts. Even when he crossed borders that his universe's most vicious heroes wouldn't consider, he showed little to no remorse. Blake's motivations for doing the things that he does aren't always apparent. Still, given his background during the Great Depression, it's safe to presume he pushed aside any emotions of morality in order to live. Everything the comedian accomplishes is insignificant to him, as a few good deeds are never enough to transform the world. This kind of thinking frequently placed him at odds with his comrades, whose whole motivation for wearing costumes and battling crime was to encourage others and improve people's lives. The comedian's ideology was disturbed when he learned that Ozymandias was preparing to bring global peace by annihilating much of New York, and he was compelled to accept that this plan would succeed. The comedian, despite his harsh temperament, was never wholly uncaring. He was rescued during World War II by a Solomon lady and her son. When he arrived at the base, his captain ordered that the entire region be destroyed, killing both the lady and her son. To avenge them, he cut the captain's throat. This prompted him to seek out Sally Jupiter. He appeared sincere in his regret for what he had done to her, and the two had an affair, which resulted in Laurie's birth. Blake silently cared for Laurie after learning she was his kid, but in an overbearing manner, such as threatening Laurie's boyfriend after she did drugs. As he grew older, he began to moderate his deeds, killing or maiming only those who were commanded. Regardless, Edward spent most of his life without guilt, slaying criminals and heroes equally. Even if he matures, it will not be enough to atone for his atrocities. If you like this video, click on the like button and comment below about which other characters' bio you want to know. And do not forget to subscribe to our channel.
It's a joke. It's all a joke.